A desperate Mustang marched helplessly as her foal was swept away by raging floodwaters. Just when all hope seemed lost, an unexpected hero emerged from the depths. This incredible story of maternal love and an unlikely rescue will restore your faith in the bonds that connect all living creatures. The Montana plains stretched endlessly under a deceptively calm blue sky. Harriet, a black Mustang mare with a distinctive white crescent on her forehead, grazed peacefully alongside her two-week-old colt, Lincoln. The foal's coat matched his mother's obsidian sheen, except for 4 white socks that made him appear to dance as he pranced beside her. Spring had arrived with unusual warmth that year, melting the mountain snowpack faster than normal. What the wild horses didn't understand was that, miles upstream, this rapid melt was creating a deadly situation. The usually gentle Whitewater Creek was transforming into a torrent. Harriet led Lincoln to their regular drinking spot, a shallow crossing where generations of Mustangs had safely accessed water, but today was different. The creek ran higher and faster than she had ever seen. Though still crossable for an adult horse, the current was deceptively strong. As Lincoln approached the water's edge, playful and curious, his tiny hooves slipped on the wet rocks. In an instant, the current caught him. Pulling his light body into the churning water, Harriet's maternal instincts exploded into action. She plunged in after her foal, but the creek, manageable for her, was a raging monster to Lincoln's small frame. Wildlife biologist Dr. Maya Roosevelt, who later investigated the incident, explained, "Flash floods in spring are increasingly common due to climate change. Adult horses can often navigate currents that are deadly to foals, creating tragic situations like this one." Harriet fought desperately to reach Lincoln, but each time she got close, the current swept him farther downstream. His high-pitched whinnies of terror mixed with his mother's frantic cries as he disappeared around a bend, heading toward the deeper pools below. The mare followed along the bank, stumbling over rocks and through thick brush, her eyes never leaving the small dark form tumbling in the white water. Other Mustangs from her band watched from higher ground, but none dared enter the flood. By the time Harriet reached the first deep pool, Lincoln had been swept into its center. His small legs churned uselessly against the circular current that held him trapped. Harriet paced the bank, calling to him, but the pool's depth and powerful whirlpool effect made rescue impossible for a horse. As Lincoln's strength began to fail, his movements weakened. Harriet's calls shifted from urgent to despairing. Her baby was drowning before her eyes. Every instinct screamed at her to save him, but the water was simply too deep, too fast, and too powerful. From underwater caves at the pool's edge, ancient eyes watched the drama unfold. The pool where Lincoln struggled had been home to Big Duke. For over 60 years, the massive Beaver, patriarch of his family, an architect of dozens of dams throughout the valley. From his underwater entrance, Big Duke recognized the sounds of distress. He observed the young horse's weakening struggles with interest that went beyond mere curiosity. Big Duke weighed nearly 70 pounds, enormous for his species, with teeth stained orange from decades of gnawing wood and a tail scarred from countless territorial battles. His kind had coexisted with the Mustangs for generations, generally ignoring one another, except when horses accidentally damaged beaver dams. But something about this moment triggered an unusual response in the old beaver. Perhaps it was the mare's desperate cries, so similar to the distress calls of his own kind when kits were in danger. Or maybe it was the full size, not much larger than a yearling beaver, that awakened long-dormant protective instincts. Dr. Roosevelt later theorized. Beavers are highly intelligent animals with complex social structures. They've been observed showing empathy toward their own species. In rare cases, this can extend beyond species boundaries. Big Duke surfaced cautiously, his small eyes scanning the scene. The foal was barely keeping his nostrils above water, the circular currents pulling him under repeatedly. The mare stood chest-deep in the shallows, unwilling to leave but unable to proceed into the deeper water. With powerful strokes of his webbed hind feet, Big Duke approached Lincoln. The foal, panicked and exhausted, barely noticed the large, brown form beside him, the beaver dove. disappearing beneath the churning surface. Harriet watched in confusion as ripples indicated movement around her drowning baby. Suddenly, Lincoln's body shifted, moving slowly but steadily towards shallower water. Beneath the surface, Big Duke had positioned himself under the foal's belly, using his powerful body to push upward and his tail as a rudder to guide them. The process was exhausting. 70 pounds of muscle strained against the weight of the waterlogged foal and the pool's relentless current. Several times, both animals were pulled under. But Big Duke persisted with a determination that would have impressed any wildlife observer. "What we witnessed defies typical animal behavior," noted Dr. James Chen, a colleague of Dr. Maya Roosevelt, who reviewed the video evidence. Prey species actively saving a potential competitor's offspring suggests levels of cognition and empathy we're only beginning to understand. Inch by inch, Big Duke maneuvered Lincoln toward the pool's edge. The foal's legs scraped against submerged rocks as they reached shallower water. Harriet, recognizing her baby was moving toward her, waded deeper, calling for encouragement. When Lincoln's hooves finally touched the muddy bottom, Big Duke surfaced one final time. His whiskered face was observed as mother and foal reunited. The mare nuzzled her exhausted baby, gently pushing him toward dry land while keeping one wary eye on the unusual rescuer. For a moment, predator and prey species evolved to avoid each other, shared a gaze across the water. Lincoln collapsed on the muddy bank, his small body heaving with exhaustion. Harriet stood protectively over him, her own legs trembling from the ordeal. Water streamed from both their coats as the mare lowered her head, nuzzling her foal with a gentle urgency. Encouraging him to stand, Big Duke remained in the shallows, his dark eyes fixed on the pair. His usually stoic expression seemed almost contemplative as he observed their reunion. After several minutes, the beaver turned and swam slowly back toward his lodge, disappearing beneath the surface with barely a ripple. The energy expenditure for that rescue was enormous. Dr. Roosevelt later calculated an adult beaver typically conserves energy carefully. This rescue would have cost Big Duke more calories than a full week of normal activity. As Lincoln struggled to his feet on shaky legs, Harriet guided him away from the treacherous water. But the foal had swallowed a significant amount of river water. His breathing remained labored. The trauma of near drowning left him weakened and vulnerable. The Mustang band had watched the entire drama unfold from the ridge above. As Harriet led Lincoln up the slope, the lead stallion, Thunderbolt, approached cautiously. His nostrils flared as he scented the foal, detecting the unusual smell of beaver that clung to Lincoln's coat. That evening, Lincoln's condition worsened. The river water in his lungs led to respiratory distress, a common complication in near-drowning victims. Harriet stayed close, her body providing warmth as the mountain temperatures dropped. Lincoln's breathing became increasingly strained. Inhale a visible effort. Dr. Chen, monitoring the situation through wildlife cameras, noted secondary. Drowning is a serious risk for any mammal that's inhaled water. Without veterinary intervention, the mortality rate is high. By dawn, Lincoln could barely stand. Harriet repeatedly encouraged him to nurse, but the foal was too weak. The mare's distress calls echoed across the Valia mother's desperation. That transcended species. From his lodge a quarter-mile downstream, Big Duke heard the calls. The beaver emerged from his den, his movements deliberate as he began the journey upstream. Overland, the trek was arduous for a creature built for water, but he persisted. Rangers later found evidence of Big Duke's overland route. The beaver had created a clear trail through the underbrush, something they typically do only when building new dam sites. This journey, however, served no territorial or constructive purpose. Big Duke arrived at the Mustang gathering as the sun reached its zenith. The band scattered nervously at his approach. Beavers and horses rarely interacted on land, but Harriet, recognizing her full savior, remained still. The beaver approached Lincoln directly, his behavior exhibiting what researchers would later call assessment patterns. He circled the weakened foal, occasionally making soft, chittering sounds. It's typically reserved for beaver family communication. What happened next challenged every assumption about interspecies behavior and animal intelligence. Big Duke's actions over the next hour would become legendary. Among wildlife researchers, the elderly beaver began gathering specific plants from the surroundings area, displaying knowledge that suggested years of observation and learning. He collected willow bark, known for its anti-inflammatory properties, and certain mosses that beavers use to line their lodges. Dr. Roosevelt, reviewing the footage later, was astounded. Beavers are known to self-medicate with willow bark for pain and inflammation, she said. But to see one applying this knowledge to help another species is unprecedented. The beaver approached Lincoln with a mouthful of chewed willow bark. Harriet tensed, but didn't interfere as Big Duke gently pressed the pulp against the foal's nostrils. The natural aspirin in the willow bark began reducing inflammation in Lincoln's airways. Next, Big Duke did something even more remarkable. He waddled to a nearby spring and soaked moss in the mineral-rich water. Returning to Lincoln, he squeezed the water near the foal's mouth. The minerals and electrolytes in the spring water were exactly what the dehydrated foal needed. This level of medical intervention suggests cognitive abilities we typically associate only with primates. Dr. Chen observed, the beaver demonstrated recognition of symptoms, knowledge of natural remedies, and the ability to apply that knowledge across species lines. Throughout the afternoon, Big Duke continued his ministries. He brought different types of vegetation, each serving a specific purpose. Some were clearly medicinal. Others seemed chosen for their nutritional value. His patient persistence reminded observers of a wilderness nurse tending to a critical patient. Harriet watched every movement, her maternal instincts at war with her natural wariness of predators. But as Lincoln's breathing gradually improved, her trust in the unusual healer grew. By evening, the foal was able to stand and take a few wobbly steps. The Mustang band maintained their distance, grazing nervously while keeping watchful eyes on the bizarre partnership unfolding before them. Thunderbolt, the lead stallion, made several aggressive displays toward Big Duke. But Harriet positioned herself between them, protecting the beaver who was helping her baby as darkness fell. Another challenge emerged. Lincoln needed to maintain his body temperature through the cold night, but his weakened condition made this difficult. Big Duke disappeared briefly, then returned with mouthfuls of dry grass and soft plant fibers, materials beavers used to insulate their lodges. Big Duke began piling the materials around Lincoln, creating a natural barrier against the cold night air. Harriet seemed to understand his intent and helped, pushing more grass toward her foal with her hooves. The beaver was essentially building a terrestrial version of a lodge chamber, explained Dr. Roosevelt. He applied architectural knowledge from his aquatic environment to solve a problem on land. By midnight, Lincoln was sleeping peacefully within his improvised shelter, his breathing steady and deep. Big Duke remained nearby, occasionally adding more insulation or checking on his patient. Harriet stood guard over them, both her head low with exhaustion, but her eyes alert. The unlikely medical intervention had stabilized Lincoln, but full recovery would require continued care. As dawn approached, Big Duke showed no signs of abandoning his adopted patient. Over the following days, an extraordinary routine developed. Each morning, Duke emerged from his lodge and made the overland journey to check on Lincoln. He spent hours tending to the recovering foal. The Mustang band gradually accepted the beaver's presence, though they remained watchful. Lincoln's recovery progressed steadily under Big Duke's care. The beaver continued bringing medicinal plants and mineral-rich water, but now he also engaged in what could only be described as physical therapy. He would gently nudge Lincoln to his feet, encouraging him to walk, strengthening his legs and improving circulation. The beaver displayed an understanding of rehabilitation principles. Dr. Roosevelt documented, he seemed to know that controlled exercise was essential to the foal's recovery, something that typically requires veterinary training to comprehend. An unexpected bond formed between the unlikely pair. Lincoln began nickering softly whenever Big Duke appeared, and the beaver responded with gentle chittering sounds. They developed a communication system that transcended species-specific sounds, indicating different needs or actions. Harriet's relationship with Big Duke evolved as well. She now grazed peacefully while the beaver tended to her foal, occasionally bringing choice grasses and dropping them near Big Duke. A gesture of gratitude that moved every observer. The beaver, primarily herbivorous, but usually focused on bark and aquatic plants, sampled these offerings with what appeared to be appreciation. The most remarkable development came when Big Duke began teaching Lincoln about water safety. He led the no-recovered foal to shallow stream edges, demonstrating how to test water depth and current strength. He showed Lincoln which rocks were stable and which were slippery, knowledge that could mean survival in the treacherous mountain terrain. This represents cognitive planning for future scenarios, Dr. Chen explained. The beaver was preparing the foal for dangers he might face later, showing foresight typically associated with higher-order thinking. Local rancher Mike Thompson, whose property bordered the area, witnessed parts of this extraordinary interaction firsthand. The Mustangs range bore witness to an extraordinary sight. Swimming lessons led by a beaver. Big Duke would swim in circles around Lincoln, showing him how to move through the water. When the young colt got nervous, the beaver would gently guide him back to shallower spots. It was like watching a swimming instructor working with a frightened child. And the lessons extended beyond just water safety. Big Duke demonstrated which plants near the water were safe to attend, which to avoid. He showed Lincoln how to detect unstable riverbanks that might collapse, and how to recognize the distant rumble of rapids that signaled dangerous waters ahead. These sessions soon attracted the attention of other young foals from the band. Before long, several colts and fillies were learning water safety from a beaver, creating a scene that defied every precedent in natural history. Their parents watched nervously from a distance, but didn't interfere, perhaps instinctively recognizing the value of what their young ones were learning. After 3 weeks, Lincoln had fully recovered and had become notably more confident around water. But the bond between him and Big Duke only grew stronger. The beaver had become a permanent part of the Mustang band's extended family, accepted and even welcomed by most of the herd. We were witnessing the formation of a new type of symbiotic relationship, Dr. Roosevelt concluded, one not based on traditional mutual benefit, but on emotional bonds and shared understanding that transcended species boundaries. Autumn arrived with unusual intensity. Heavy rains in the mountains triggered multiple flash floods, making every stream crossing potentially deadly. The Mustang band, led by Thunderbolt, was forced to constantly alter its routes to reach safer grazing grounds. One morning, the band approached Whitewater Creek at a different crossing, far upstream from Big Duke's usual territory. The water ran high, but was still passable for adult horses. Harriet and Lincoln, now 6 months old and significantly larger than during his near drowning, were in the middle of the group. As the band began crossing, no one noticed the wall of water hurtling down from the mountains, the result of a natural dam breaking. Miles upstream, the first horses had just reached the opposite bank when the flash flood hit with devastating force. 3 adult horses were swept away instantly, including Thunderbolt. Harriet and Lincoln, caught midstream, were separated in an instant. The mare fought desperately to reach her colt, but the current was overpowering. Despite all of Big Duke's swimming lessons, Lincoln was overwhelmed by the raw violence of the surging water. From a nearby hill overlooking the chaos, Big Duke saw everything. He had been following the band at a respectful distance, maintaining his bond with Lincoln even outside his usual territory, without hesitation. The elderly beaver plunged down the hillside toward the flood. What happened next defied every known survival instinct. Dr. Roosevelt later reported, the beaver entered floodwaters that were dangerous even for his species, driven by something beyond rational behavior. Big Duke's decades of experience reading water currents proved crucial, while the horses fought against the flow. The beaver worked with it, choosing eddies and backflows to his advantage as he navigated toward Lincoln. The young horse was being pulled rapidly toward a narrow canyon, the entrance to a series of violent rapids that would be fatal, witnesses described. Big Duke performing maneuvers that seemed impossible for a beaver his age and size. He used submerged rocks as pivot points, his powerful tail acting like a rudder. Steering through the chaos with uncanny precision, his lifetime of dam building had given him something rare, a near supernatural ability to read the water's intentions. Lincoln was weakening rapidly when Big Duke finally reached him. Big Duke couldn't simply push Lincoln from below the current was too strong. Instead, he bit down on Lincoln's mane, using his entire body as a living rudder, guiding them both toward a calmer, eddy pool. The physics involved were remarkable, Dr. Chen later wrote. The Beaver was essentially applying fluid dynamics. To redirect a mass many times his own weight required perfect timing and incredible strength. The rescue took nearly an hour. Big Duke navigated Lincoln through a maze of chaotic currents, drawing upon every trick he had learned in 60 years of living with water. Several times they were both pulled under, but the Beaver never released his grip. Finally, they reached a sandy beach where other surviving horses had gathered. Harriet was there. She had been pushed to safety by the same eddy current Big Duke had targeted. The reunion was emotional. Harriet nuzzled both her exhausted colt and his heroic rescuer. Big Duke collapsed on the sand, his aged body pushed beyond all limits. The rescue had cost him everything. He lay still, his breathing shallow and labored. The massive effort of saving Lincoln had drained the last reserves of his strength. Harriet stood over him, her muzzle gently brushing his soaked fur. While Lincoln pressed close to his savior's side, the surviving Mustangs gathered in an unprecedented circle around the dying Beaver, even horses who had never interacted with. Big Duke seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. They stood in silent vigil as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Dr. Roosevelt and her team, who had rushed to the scene after detecting the flood through monitoring equipment, remained at a respectful distance. "We were witnessing something sacred," she later wrote, "a farewell ceremony that transcended species boundaries." Lincoln lay down beside Big Duke, his young body providing warmth to the Beaver's cooling form. The colt made soft nickering sounds, the same ones he had used during their swimming lessons. Big Duke's eyes, though dimming, tracked the movement of his adopted student one final time. As darkness fell, Big Duke's breathing stopped. Harriet nudged him gently several times as if trying to wake him before finally accepting the truth. What happened next stunned even the most seasoned wildlife researchers. The Mustang band began a slow, solemn procession. Each horse approached Big Duke's body, touched it briefly with their muzzle, and then moved silently away. It was a gesture of respect, mourning, and shared loss. Lincoln remained beside his friend until dawn, when Harriet gently coaxed him to leave. But the story didn't end with Big Duke's death. Over the following months, remarkable changes emerged. Within the Mustang band, they began creating new paths to water that avoided dangerous currents. Young foals were actively instructed by older horses in water safety, mimicking the very techniques the Beaver had demonstrated. We documented the first known case of cross-species knowledge transfer being absorbed into a wild populations. Cultural behavior, Dr. Chen wrote in his groundbreaking paper. Big Duke's wisdom lived on through the horses. That spring, researchers discovered something unexpected near the very creek where Lincoln had nearly drowned months before. The Mustangs had created a memorial. A mound of carefully pushed stones stood near Big Duke's old lodgia, quiet tribute. Wildlife cameras later captured the herd visiting the site regularly, especially Harriet and Lincoln. They would pause, stand silently, and then continue on as if paying their respects to the creature who had changed everything, Storm. Now, a strong yearling could often be seen teaching other young horses the same swimming techniques Big Duke had once shown him. He demonstrated the same patient persistence his Beaver mentor had displayed. Ensuring each foal understood water safety before moving on, the beavers of the valley seemed to recognize Storm as well. When he approached their dams, they showed none of the usual alarm behaviors. Instead, they surfaced calmly, observing him with what seemed like recognition. Years later, when Storm became a band stallion himself, he led his herd with an uncommon wisdom, especially around water. Under his leadership, no foal in his band ever drowned, a remarkable record in a region notorious for flash floods. Local ranchers began calling him the Beaver Horse. noting his uncanny ability to predict and avoid dangerous water conditions. Some believed he could sense the river's moods the way Big Duke once had. The bond between Big Duke and Storm had created a lasting legacy, proof that love, sacrifice, and wisdom can transcend the boundaries nature seems to impose in the wilds of Montana. Horses still pass down the teachings of a beaver who chose compassion over instinct, forever changing how two species coexist. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear about the incredible bonds that connect all living creatures.